Yeah. Okay, right, good afternoon everyone. So basically, I think the presentation I'm going to give will be just slightly different to everything you've seen before. Just in respect of, actually, I'm kind of a new kid on the block down here. So I'm both new to Cornwall, I was only moved here about in the last 9 months. And also at the moment, I'm not an established businesses like the previous presentations you've seen. So I'm actually now on a startup myself, and actually this is what I'm launching right now in partnership with some companies in London. So kind of go through this. So what I want to talk to you today about, basically, I'll give you a little bit of background on myself, my technology kind of experience in the industry. And I think maybe there's a few parallels based on what I've seen and how the industry is evolving and what the startup and the opportunities are for yourselves as graduates. And also the parallel kind of comes in where even for myself at the moment, I'm kind of doing something completely new and I'm learning as well. And it's kind of maybe there's some similarities both in location and what I'm learning and what we're trying to do down here. Second to that, I'm going to go through a little bit about the company I'm trying to establish down here, what I'm kind of trying to do with that and what it's going to look like. And then we're going to talk through a little bit more detail of an actual real project I've got in the order books right now as well. It's around machine learning and some kind of interesting technologies. The first thing I want to kind of go through as well, the reason I'm here today though at the end of the day is I want to get some engagement. So I'm new here on obviously both on Cornwall and also from a point of view at the moment it's just been myself developing. I'm going to build out relationships across the industry down here, but secondly what's really important to me is getting relationship into universities and looking for kind of opportunities for people to work with me going forward, both internships and graduate schemes later on. Again, I want to kind of get that flow. So to kind of give you a bit of background, first of all, on myself, I've actually been in London for the last 20 years, both London and New York. I've been in the investment banking industry, and I'm sure it probably comes with some connotations, that kind of industry, given credit crunch. And yeah, so I've worked a long time in London, some of the time in New York and Wall Street, and I'm sure some of you have seen all the stereotypes of Wolf of Wall Street and these types of characters, and I can actually confirm there are quite a few of those characters actually out there, so it's a bit of fun. What am I? At heart, I'm a technician. So basically, I started coding myself when I was about 8 years old. One of the things that I love greatly about this industry and why I find it so fun is continually evolving. Every single day, there's something new to learn. It's not something that stays static. There's multiple things you've seen today about processes that have been mentioned, behaviours, the how to do things and the what. Okay, both of those things are evolving all the time in this industry. In effect, technology is one of the newer industries in this world. Construction's been around since God knows when, yeah. Technology is still a new industry, there's still a lot emerging, and it does give you as graduates, I think, a lot of opportunity to influence it, okay? So one of the things really I started off on was, after I did my studies, was investment banking, and I was a Java developer. So I did that for about 7 to 10 years, and this was kind of in the early days of J2EE and these types of technologies. And it was only then that the industry itself was moving away from these big, heavy structured planning sessions that were called waterfall, going through all the designs in months on end, and then a long text, development sessions, big testing at the end and try and deliver, into this kind of newer models that you're seeing today and these kind of concepts that are called agile. Okay, and this is about how do you build the software quickly, get it out to market, get quick feedback on it. Okay, now in the investment banking arena, it was a very interesting role. I was working with a trading desk globally. It's a high pressure environment. You're trying to turn around code really quickly, and it's a very complicated environment. So it was all sorts of things. You're working on high mathematical problems. We have trades, exotic trades as they're called. Overnight, just to understand the risk you're running on one trade, could be up to about 6-7 million calculations. And they're quite heavyweight formulas coded up in C++. So the type of technologies we're trying to use back then, and this is early 2000s, were things like in-memory distributed caching, products you'll hear nowadays, things like coherence and those types of things, grid computing, and just before, actually at the end of kind of that period of development was the starting of what you now see as the cloud. And so a lot of the problems that we're seeing, predominantly driven really in many ways by investment banks, was how do you commoditize the CPU, how do we build this out, and that was kind of the emergence of cloud technologies. How do we actually use a service out there to actually provide this for us? Okay, so now, as I was going through my career in the investment banks, it was always it was an interesting place to work. It was high pressure, it was really, quite dynamic. However, the credit crunch came around, obviously, and a lot of things have changed. Higher regulation, a lot slower pace of delivery, a lot less innovation, okay? Now, one of the things that's happened up in London and around the banking industry is that basically it's got into this inertia, basically, where people aren't able to effect change very quickly these days. And this is where the industry has gone through a fundamental switch now, away from these big internal IT departments into a broken out, smaller community called fintech. Now, I'm not sure if any of you heard the term fintech before in the universities? No, it's all new. So this is basically, again, something I think is a wonderful innovation in the industry, and something as for graduates especially is going to allow yourselves to get involved in, give yourself real opportunity going forward. Okay? Beforehand, you'd be at your desk in London. I know somebody mentioned earlier, I did this for 20 years, be on the Northern Line in the morning, coming up from Tooting into London Bridge. It was horrible every day, you're squashed in. It was not the most pleasant of experiences, okay? Now, to begin with, in the early 2000s, it was quite fun. I was quite young, you know, out in Shoreditch and all these kind of funky places. It seemed like a great time. But realistically, what's happening inside these banks now is they have such an old technology stack, not developed in the right way, fairly antiquated technologies if you look at what's now available in the market. I used to have graduates come in and be put onto Windows XP. And most of them would turn around to me like, what the hell's this technology, Lewis? You know, I was using like Windows whatever down in the university, and now I feel like I've gone back 10 years. So actually within these massive corporates, there is, you know, you have to be at your desk at 7:30 in the morning, you're not leaving till 8 o'clock at night, you're always sat in one place, you're not working on the most interesting of technologies. And one of the things that has developed, and one of the things that I love the most, is the fact that this is now breaking out. What you're starting to see is much smaller, much more agile kind of little companies that are predominantly growing around London and New York, okay? Now, whilst that seems to be a London-centric and a kind of a New York thing, okay, actually, realistically, you can now start to develop the software remotely from any location. So one of the reasons for me, first of all, I worked 20 years in the investment banks, and I got to a point where, okay, I had enough. I was on conference calls for an hour globally, and all we talked about was releasing one CSV file from a system, okay? Now, I was thinking, really, this isn't, you know, this is not particularly dynamic. It's not the most fun you can ever have. So I decided to jack it all in, move down here to Cornwall. Now, one of the opportunities you have here is you can now start to work with all the tool sets here remotely from any destination. So you can be in Cornwall, you can be in Chamonix, you can be all sorts of places, okay? Now, for me, I think there's a great opportunity down here in Cornwall as well. There's a good setup across the infrastructure. I'm new here, so this is an objective view. There is a good network of people down here. You have some high technology companies now working down here, and you can work globally from this location, and you've got access to all sorts of different markets, okay? So I think there's a good location strategy down here, and I think there's a very good and a high-tech setup down here as well. Now, one of the things I wanted to go through today, I'm not sure how much time I've got left, but I'll do it very quickly. This is one of the products I have now on my order book. So I work closely with a number of startups in London, and I'm going to be kind of working exclusively with them for the next 3 to 5 years potentially. It's about 3 or 4 companies within it. This is one of them. They're called Stitch. You can look them up online, stitch.io. The purpose of what the Stitch the product does is it's being sold now, and it's actually live with one major investment bank and 2 major consultancies, financial consultancies with over 100,000 employees. And the idea of this is taking all the different types of data within an organisation, and this is CVs, timesheets, LinkedIn profiles, project proposals and pitches. And what it's trying to understand is, what does your workforce look like? What's the structure internally in the workforce? What skills do you have? And so therefore, how do we actually employ the skills in our organisation correctly? Quite often people are on different projects that they're not that highly skilled on, or people's career aspirations are not seen very well. So what this product actually allows us to do is take all this information and present to the overall senior level in the organisation what the workforce looks like, what their abilities are, and actually how to remobilise your organisation. Now, the ways it does this, because one of the difficulties in IT, of course, is managing data. Huge problem. We've always done many things over the years, XML, you know, relational databases, graph databases, all these types of things. What this is actually trying to use underneath here is a lot of machine learning techniques to be able to actually understand the structured data, how the data relates to each other, and therefore, for example, you might have the word Java on someone's CV, but that also could mean things like, you know, Java store procedures, Scala. You know, you might have functional programming on there. All the different types of functional programming is like Erlang, etc. So the idea of this is actually then trying to understand and learn through its ability to process the data what each person's abilities are and skill sets, rather than somebody there having to go in and type in all these relationships and understanding, okay? So trying to use machine learning techniques basically to put all of this complex unstructured data together and basically present an organisational profile. Now, undoubtedly I'm running out of time.
One slide
really quickly, and so this is all of the kind of the some of the parts behind it. So this is a number of the different techniques that are being used here. Term frequency, inverse document frequencies, if any of you do machine learning or comp science at the moment, time-based algos, etc. So this is, I won't go through this in too much detail, but just one of the things I wanted to say again is this is some of the interesting technologies that are emerging in my startup at the moment. This is what's looking on the order book over the next few years. And the reason, again, I just want to come back to this, there's a lot of opportunity down here in Cornwall. It's hopefully about understanding what opportunities there are, taking advantage of them and being proactive out there. So again, I'd like to hear from you as well afterwards, if anybody's interested in getting involved in these types of things, what kind of opportunities there are, and maybe things to learn from. And one of the most interesting things about this sector at the moment is quickly evolving, it's dynamic, there is a hell of a lot to learn out there, and there's a real opportunity. Okay, done.
Thank you.
Sweet, cheers. Thank you.